John Fitzgerald Kennedy served as the 35th President of the United States from 1961 until his assassination on November 22, 1963. Kennedy served at the height of the Cold War, and the majority of his foreign policy concerned relations with the Soviet Union and Cuba. John F. Kennedy had policies as president that had huge populist appeal, yet these same policies upset some of the most powerful people and interests in the world. There is more than enough proof that this was a conspiracy, and one of the most sound explanations of what really happened comes from Roger Stone and The Man Who Killed Kennedy, which reveals that yes, the CIA, FBI, the mob did kill Kennedy, but without Lyndon Baines Johnson and his connections, the assassination could not have happened. Everybody talks about the Clinton body count. Let's talk about the LBJ body count.
Yeah, I think that Lyndon Baines Johnson was responsible for the murder of at least 18 individuals, and that's not counting the servicemen on the decks of the USS Liberty, which is an American battleship where Johnson authorized an attack on that ship by the Israelis, but in an effort to blame Arab entities in order to spark a war. Let's put that aside. So Johnson most definitely responsible for multiple murders in Texas to cover up his stolen elections, to cover up his corruption. I detail all of this in the book, so it is not out of character. I think the book is two things. Yes, I make the case as to why I think Lyndon Johnson is the linchpin in a plot to kill Kennedy. Now, this does not in any way negate those who say, oh no, it was the Central Intelligence Agency. They're absolutely right. The Central Intelligence Agency is deeply involved in Kennedy's murder, but Lyndon Johnson takes the very rare step when he's the Senate Majority Leader of appointing himself to the subcommittee of Defense Appropriations, where the CIA's secret black box budget is prepared. So Johnson is the paymaster for the CIA. Those who say, no, it was organized crime, the mob rubbed out Kennedy. Well, they're not wrong either. The mob is deeply involved. Lyndon Johnson was on the pad for the mob. He was being paid bribes by Carlos Marcello, who was the boss of the mob in Texas and Louisiana. The mob's motive is very clear. Ambassador Joseph Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's father, has told the mob bosses when he gets $1 million from them for the 1960 campaign, that if John F. Kennedy is elected, they will drop the deportation efforts against Carlos Marcello, who I just mentioned, the gangster who ran the mob in Texas and Louisiana, and also Santo Trafficante, who ran the mob in Florida. The Central Intelligence Agency's motive is, of course, they believe that Kennedy has bungled the Bay of Pigs invasion. In fact, the Bay of Pigs invasion plan, as approved by JFK, included air cover from 29 Panamanian flagged bombers flying out of Panama, supposedly piloted by Cuban pilots. And nobody's told Kennedy that part of the plan was canceled 24 hours before the invasion. The CIA motive is also clear in that the Cuban Missile Crisis narrative that Americans have come to swallow, that brave John and Bobby Kennedy faced down Khrushchev, who blinked and removed his missiles from Cuba, is false. For 40 years, it was classified that we removed our missiles from Italy and Turkey, changing the balance of power in the European theater in a secret deal with Khrushchev, who agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba, but most probably actually never did, since there were no online inspections involved in that agreement. So the Central Intelligence Agency's motive is clear. Johnson's connection to them is clear. The mob's motive is clear because John Kennedy double crosses them, but Lyndon Johnson is being paid on a monthly basis to protect the illegal gambling operations of Carlos Marcello in Dallas, in Houston, and San Antonio. Then there's Big Texas Oil. They're involved in this. I think they finance it. They are upset because the Kennedys want to repeal the oil depletion allowance, which would mean hundreds of millions of dollars in additional taxes. The banks and the banking interests are unhappy with Kennedy because he's demanding a silver-backed dollar, and they're opposed to a silver-backed dollar. The Israelis are unhappy with JFK because he will not agree to let them have nuclear weapons. So Kennedy had a unique set of enemies, institutions, and power centers in the American government that had a motive in getting rid of them. But the man that had the greatest single motive, the man whose motive was most acute and time sensitive, was Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson had blackmailed his way on the ticket in 1960 to begin with. JFK had chosen Stuart Symington, the senator from Missouri, to be his running mate until Lyndon Johnson showed up at his hotel suite in Los Angeles with Speaker Sam Rayburn of Texas and showed JFK's photographs of himself in bed with a beautiful East German spy who was a hooker. And these were thoughtfully supplied by Johnson's next door neighbor, J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover's motive is clear, by the way. He hits mandatory retirement age in 1964. The Kennedys already been telling people that they're putting him out to pasture. So his motive becomes pretty clear. Johnson was under investigation. Robert Kennedy's Justice Department is in hot pursuit in the Bobby Baker scandal. Baker is the sergeant at arms in the Senate. He's Johnson's right-hand man. Nothing moves in the Senate without a bribe to Bobby Baker, passed on to Lyndon Johnson. The hearings into Baker's activities before the U.S. Senate open on the 22nd of November, 1963. Throughout that day, Johnson is on the phone back to Washington to see whether his name has yet come up. He was also under investigation in the Billy Sol Estes investigation. Billy Sol Estes was a flamboyant wheeler-dealer who's gotten huge agricultural contracts through the largesse of Lyndon Johnson, and he's kicking back to Johnson. He would ultimately go to prison. When he gets out of prison, he goes under oath to outline the entire plot to kill Kennedy. It's interesting, in Robert Caro's Pulitzer Prize-winning multi-volume biography of Johnson, there's no mention whatsoever of Billy Sol Estes. It's like he doesn't even exist. It was a huge scandal. So again, I think that there is, I hate this word, there is a conspiracy, involves many people, many of whom have their very own motives, but Johnson knows he's about to be dropped from the ticket and he's about to be prosecuted and likely go into federal prison. So he has the most acute motive of anybody.
What I gathered from your book is that Lyndon Baines Johnson used assassinations as a tool that helped him rise in power and influence.
Well, also vote stealing. I mean, he stole his 1948 election to the U.S. Senate. He ran earlier for the Senate and was narrowly defeated. But the most famous, I think, is the murder of a man named John Douglas Kinzer. Kinzer was shot and killed in cold blood in Dallas, right outside of Dallas, actually, at a golf course, because he was trying to blackmail Johnson. Kinzer was in some kind of romantic relationship with Johnson's sister. He was trying to blackmail Johnson regarding some things he had learned about the 1948 election. He is shot and killed by a man named Malcolm Mac Wallace, who's charged with first-degree murder, goes to trial in 1951. It's how we have his fingerprints. This becomes important in a moment. And he's the only man in the history of Texas to be convicted of murder, but get a suspended sentence. Wallace very clearly working at the U.S. Agriculture Department in a patronage job arranged for by Lyndon Johnson. Later goes to work for Temco, a defense contractor owned by D.H. Byrd, later renamed General Dynamics. He becomes important in this way. On the boxes, the cardboard boxes, in the so-called crow's nest on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, there are fingerprints which for a long period go unidentified, but are later matched to those of Malcolm Mac Wallace. Wallace is an expert shot. He's also a Marine Corps veteran. He's a much better and higher rated marksman than Lee Harvey Oswald. No less than 6 witnesses tell either the FBI or the Dallas police that they see a man standing in the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository building that meets the physical description, not of 145-pound Lee Harvey Oswald wearing a white t-shirt, but a middle-aged man, balding, wearing spectacles, wearing a tan jacket and light-colored pants. That is very clearly Malcolm Mac Wallace. Interestingly enough, another man surfaces, a man named Loy Factor, a Native American. Factor later says that he was hired by Wallace as kind of the backup shooter, that Wallace saw him shooting in a shooting contest at a country fair a year earlier, told him he might have some work for him. Factor claims that he was on the 6th floor in the same room from which some of the shots at Kennedy were fired. Factor is to be believed because he perfectly describes the physical layout of the room, including the detail that there was a flat saw to the right of the window from which Kennedy was shot, because there was construction going on that floor. No way for Loy Factor to know that unless he was actually there. By the way, a number of the witnesses who say they saw the man matching the description of Malcolm Mac Wallace also describe a second man in the room who they say is dark complected, either Indian or perhaps Mexican. So yes, I think that there are multiple shooters. I think everybody has an interest here, but at least one shooter can be tied directly to Lyndon Baines Johnson through his fingerprints.
And many people that were directly linked to the assassination, including Malcolm Wallace, including witnesses, insiders, journalists, started dying, committing suicide, being murdered right after the assassination. Then when the House Select Committee on Assassinations was established in 1976 to investigate the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., there were an unusual number of deaths, murders, suicides of those associated with the Kennedy assassination. Could you talk a little bit about the people around the JFK assassination that died and or were murdered before they could bring forth the truth?
Yeah, probably the best known one. I mean, first of all, as you know, the syndicated columnist Dorothy Kilgallen just dies very mysteriously shortly after the assassination. She interviews Jack Ruby, the gangster who was responsible for shooting and killing Lee Harvey Oswald on national television, cold blood. She's starting to promote that she's got a killer story, is going to break the whole thing over, and then she dies under very mysterious circumstances. But I think largely, despite the very best efforts of the mainstream media to sell this idea that Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone nut, a communist, acting alone, shot Kennedy from the back 3 times. The American people have never quite bought that. We also know that Lee Harvey Oswald has no nitrates, no powder burns on his arms or his chest. So if he has shot a leaky World War II vintage Italian carbine, which he allegedly paid $29 for, he would have been covered with nitrates, but there are no nitrates on Oswald. I believe Oswald is exactly what he says he is. What does he say when they bring him out in public?
I'm just a patsy.
He says, I'm a patsy. I didn't shoot anybody. I think he's telling the truth. Why, by the way, they would parade him out in public is an interesting question. I suspect they did so because, he needed to be silenced, and of course he was. The Warren Commission is, as Nixon once told me, the greatest goddamn hoax of all time. And they claim that Jack Ruby had no known association with organized crime, which is, of course, laughable. His real name, Jacob Rubenstein, had worked for the mob in Chicago, had worked for Marcello, running a casino in Cuba. He's a button man for the mob, and that's pretty fairly known.
Let's talk about the Warren Commission and President Nixon's comment that it's the greatest hoax. There were dozens of witnesses that said that they heard shots coming from behind the picket fence of the grassy knoll. Some even saw the potential assassins, but they were outright ignored by the Warren Commission. Let's listen to some of these testimonials.
Is this where you were sitting on November 22nd, Mr. Price?
Yes, sir.
Right here?
Right here on this spot.
And where did you think you heard the shots come from?
From behind the overpass over there.
And where did you see the man run?
Over behind that wooden fence.
Did you give that information to the Dallas Sheriff's Department on the very day of the assassination?
Yes, I did.
Were you ever called as a witness by the Warren Commission?
No, sir.
As the presidential limousine was rounding the curve on Elm Street, there was a loud explosion. At the time, I didn't know what it was, but it sounded like a loud firecracker or a gunshot, and it sounded like it came from the left and in front of us, towards the wooden fence. And there was a puff of smoke that came underneath the trees on the embankment. And as soon as we heard the shots, we ran around to the wooden fence. And when we got there, there was no one there, but there was footprints in the mud.
Were you questioned by the Dallas police on that day?
Yes, I was.
Were you ever called as a witness by the Warren Commission?
No, sir, I wasn't.
And did you see anything which might indicate to you where the shots came from?
Well, we all four seen about the same thing. As the shots, the smoke came from behind the hedge.
Is this the exact spot you were standing on November 22nd, Mr. Holland?
That's correct. This is the exact spot that I was standing November the 22nd.
And where did you hear that third shot come from?
Right over about 20 or 30 feet from the other end of that little picket fence.
And where was the smoke that you saw?
It drifted right out underneath those green trees, those two trees.
And what did you find here?
A lot of footprints behind this car, mud on the bumpers. And this is where I saw the smoke from the third shot.
You should think the shot came from up on top of the viaduct toward the president, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Not on the viaduct itself, but up on top of the hill, a little mound of ground near the garden.
There was a flash of light in this immediate area on the embankment. And what this was, I could not state at that time, and at this time I could not identify it, other than there was some unusual occurrence, a flash of light or smoke or...
And I saw that it was the President of the United States. And as I was panning down this direction, just as I got to about this position, a shot come right past my left ear. And that meant it would have had to have come from this direction. And to me, it seemed like a second shot was at least fired over my head.
The Mormon photo was taken at the exact moment the kill shot was delivered to President Kennedy. The following experts from the Badgeman documentary show three figures could be made out in the photo.
Gary Mack was the first to isolate the image, now known as Badgeman.
What I was looking at, to a lot of people, might have just been like looking at an ink blot or something. And all of a sudden I started to see eyes and ears and forehead. And we realized that this fellow was probably wearing a police uniform or some type of uniform that was close enough to what the Dallas police were wearing so that he could pass as a police officer. And really, to me, that was the one scary moment. A police officer in that location, away from where people were watching. If anyone did see him, they wouldn't think anything about it, because there were police in that area, although nowhere near where we see this guy. So this guy was an imposter.
And I thought it was a police officer because he had a uniform of a police officer.
And I think they knew the evening of the assassination that there was a second gunman up on the grassy knoll.
This colorized version of the Badgeman picture was shown to Gordon Arnold for the first time.
If it's a flash, it would be like off of a muzzle flash. This looks like a police officer because that would be the badge. That would be the arm emblem.
Looking at the Warren Commission, you have individuals that are clear-cut enemies of John F. Kennedy, seem to have been put there for a purpose by LBJ to create this false narrative. Then you have individuals that seem to have been rewarded by political success. Do you want to talk about that topic?
Certainly. Let me take them piece by piece. First of all, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI complete their investigation into Kennedy's murder in less than 7 days. And that investigation is handed over to the Warren Commission with the expectation the Warren Commission will simply rubber stamp it, and that will be the conclusion. So Johnson has selected people that he can control. Having Allen Dulles, for example, who JFK had fired as CIA director over the failure of the Bay of Pigs, on the commission is a very curious choice. Now, after Robert Kennedy died, and Johnson is asked, why in the world would you put Allen Dulles on the Warren Commission? Johnson said, well, I did it because Bobby asked me to. That's almost certainly a lie. Secondarily, Gerald Ford was compromised. Lyndon Johnson ran an operation in what was then the Sheraton Carlton Hotel, where he had a private room that was set up with a two-way mirror and a camera. And therefore, congressmen and senators and other powerful people would go to Bobby Baker, who could arrange a tryst for you with a woman or a man and a woman or whatever your kink might be. And of course, little did they know that all of this was being filmed. And therefore, Johnson had blackmail information on many people. We know one of those people to be Gerald Ford. That way, Ford, when there were serious questions about the conclusions reached by the FBI, and therefore the conclusions that were about to be adopted by the Warren Commission, a deputy to J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, went to Ford and specifically asked him to take the diagram in the official autopsy of Kennedy's body and change with a pencil the depiction of the wound in Kennedy's upper back to the base of his neck, which Ford admitted to the New York Times he actually did. The Warren Commission never gets any autopsy photos. They get artists' renderings of the autopsy photos. Arlen Specter is a little bit more complicated, in all honesty, because I knew him well, and we fought about this, after a couple martinis. He was absolutely convinced of his cockamamie single bullet theory, that being that one of the three bullets fired by Oswald hit Kennedy and then went on to hit Governor Connally. The problem with that is a man named Jim Tague, who I got to interview for my book before he died.
Right after the presidential car had turned the corner, I heard these three loud noises. When I jumped behind the concrete abutment, I felt something sting me on the face as I was standing down there. I said, just sting, and Walters looked at me and says, yes, says, you got blood on your cheek. He says, look there on the curb, there was a very visible mark on the curb where a bullet had struck. Either a fragment of the bullet or piece of the concrete, it flew up and scratched my face.
And this is seen by a sheriff's deputy from the Dallas County Sheriff's Office, who says, we're going down to the Dallas police. You've got to report this immediately. And they do. So Tague knows that there's an unaccounted for shot, that there has to be more than the three shots that are accounted for in the Warren Commission report, and which he's hearing about in the news. But no one ever contacts him. Then, evidently one night he's in a bar, he's telling this story, and one of the people who overhears it is Jim Lehrer, who's then an AP reporter. So you immediately had across the country an Associated Press story regarding a fourth bullet. This is when Arlen Specter had to come up with the explanation that one bullet had hit both Kennedy and Connally. Something, by the way, that Connally denied throughout his entire life. Now, since this, just not long ago, several months ago, a retired Secret Service agent named Paul Landis came forward to say that actually he had found a bullet in the back seat of a limousine that he'd gone into Parkland Hospital. He had placed it on Kennedy's stretcher. Somehow that bullet is later found on Connolly's stretcher, but it really blows to hell the whole idea that the bullet on Connolly's stretcher had hit Kennedy, then hit Connolly, and then dislodged itself from his thigh. In fact, Connolly was hit in the wrist. There's a nurse who's come forward, I believe her name is Phyllis Hill, who has said that she saw Paul Landis put the bullet on Kennedy's stretcher, pristine bullet. Additionally, now you have a number of the Parkland hospital doctors who've come forward in an extraordinary new documentary to say that actually they saw wounds in JFK at Parkland Hospital consistent with him being hit from both the front and the back, and that the wound in his throat, which is described as having come from behind and an exit wound, is in fact an entry wound from the front. They're ordered to do a tracheotomy, so it is undetectable by the time his body gets to Bethesda Medical Center. Every one of these doctors say that there's a large grapefruit-sized blowout wound on the back of his head. Again, by the time his body gets to Bethesda Medical Center, he appears to have been patched. So there's an elaborate effort here. Kennedy's body is removed from Texas in violation of the law. Texas state law requires an autopsy. If you are killed or you die in Texas, you have to have an autopsy. There's actually a face-off between Texas Rangers and the Secret Service, who removed Kennedy's body at gunpoint. Every American has seen the famous photo of Johnson being sworn in on Air Force One, and I say to you, why? There's no reason for that. Under the law, the instant JFK is declared dead, Lyndon Baines Johnson is automatically President of the United States. There's no oath required. And Johnson, as we now know, called Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General back in Washington, to ask him to get the exact oath because he was going to take the oath. This is Johnson twisting the knife in his arch rival, Robert Kennedy. We also know the judge who swore Johnson in had just been rejected by JFK for a federal judicial appointment. She was a state judge. As soon as Johnson becomes president, she is appointed to the federal bench. And of course, very famously in the newsreel footage and in some still photographs, Johnson, after being sworn in, winks at one of his colleagues, a Texas segregationist Democrat with a bow tie, I can't recall his name at the moment, who was in all of the pictures. So the whole purpose of that scene, which was legally unnecessary, was to get the imprimatur of Jacqueline Kennedy, who's clearly still dazed, splattered with blood, standing next to him to connote the legitimacy onto Johnson's presidency. If you read the memoirs of several of his aides, they say his greatest single fear was that Robert Kennedy was going to start asking the wrong questions, that Robert Kennedy would see through the events of that day. There's a huge amount of circumstantial but very strong evidence to support the idea that Lyndon Johnson is a man with the motive, the means, and the opportunity to kill Kennedy. It is Johnson who, through his sitting governor, John Connolly, who was previously Johnson's chief of staff in the Senate, that they insisted on a motorcade route that went through the city and went through Dealey Plaza. So if you're going from the Dallas airport to the merchandise mart, neither one of which is in the city of Dallas, why did the motorcade have to go through Dallas when it should have stayed on the freeway? If you go to the book by Jerry Bruno, who is Kennedy's chief advance man, that specific motorcade route was insisted on by Governor John Connolly. And Kennedy's advance team and the Secret Service agreed to it only reluctantly.
In your book, I believe you mentioned there was a planned assassination in Chicago. Like, this was something that had to happen, but Dallas seemed to be the perfect place because of LBJ's control of Dallas.
Yeah, Johnson has a complete control of the mayor of Dallas, whose brother just happens to be the number 2 guy at the CIA who was fired by JFK. So Earl Cable is the mayor of Dallas. His brother, Charles Cable, is the CIA official who canceled the air cover for the men storming the beaches in the Bay of Pigs. He was cashiered along with Allen Dulles. By the way, the mayor and the police chief of Dallas never leave Johnson's side on the day of the assassination. Johnson has control of the Dallas police. Johnson has control of the Dallas County Sheriff's Office. At a morning meeting, morning briefing for the Dallas County Sheriff's Office, the officers are told that no matter what you see and hear today, you are to stand down. You are to arrest no one. Which is a very interesting instruction. Yeah, there's a lot of anomalies about that day. So according to the regulations of the Secret Service, all buildings on both sides of the street are supposed to have been searched, emptied, and completely sealed. Obviously, that doesn't happen. There's supposed to be 6 motorcycle cops, 3 abreast on either side of the presidential limousine. There's only 1 motorcycle officer, and he is directed to ride behind the presidential car. The normal order of the cars is interrupted. So there is supposed to be a carload of Secret Service agents immediately behind the presidential limousine. They are supposed to be looking for snipers. They're carrying rifles. They're supposed to be looking at the high buildings. They're supposed to be plainclothes Secret Service agents dispersed throughout the crowd. There are not. There's supposed to be 2 agents on the bumper of the rear car. You can go to YouTube and see the video of them being told by their superiors to stand down.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about how many shots there were. How many shots do you think there were, Roger, altogether fired on that day?
It's hard to say. I guess the place to start is how many gunmen, okay? So there's definitely somebody shooting from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. I believe that that's Malcolm Wallace for the reasons I have outlined. There's also very clearly is a shooter on the so-called grassy knoll behind the fence because several men in a railroad tower that is adjacent see and describe this for the Dallas police. So I think there multiple people see a puff of smoke. People start running towards the grassy knoll, towards the fence immediately after the shooting. And then finally a motorcycle officer shoos them away. Also a man with a Secret Service badge says this is a restricted area. That man turns out to be Bernard Barker, who, I don't know, totally coincidentally just pops up later as one of the Watergate burglars. How could that be? So I think that there's a shooter on the grassy knoll. I think there's a shooter in the Texas School Book Depository building. I think there's likely also a shooter in the sewer grate. The gangster Jimmy Roselli has always claimed that was him. May have been. He may have just been trying to get his 15 minutes. He was kind of a flamboyant character. He's later found floating off the coast of Miami, cut up into pieces in an oil drum. And then I believe there was probably a shooter in the Dow Tex building. This would explain why the Parkland doctors said that Kennedy was hit from both the front and the back.
So when you look at the Zapruder film, right, that the kill shot that happens pretty much blows up half of Kennedy's head, right? You see it happen on camera. But then there's that famous picture of the dead JFK with his face completely intact. What happened there?
Well, it's very interesting. First, 2 things are true. First of all, the Zapruder film was immediately purchased by Time Life and locked up for 50 years, so nobody saw it. And Dan Rather of CBS News, who's the only journalist who sees the film, insists that Kennedy is hit from back and his head snaps sharply forward. Well, we now know from seeing the film that that's a complete and total lie. That in fact Kennedy's head goes back and to the left, back and to the left. Interestingly enough, this is pretty elementary, but I actually proved this to Arlen Specter. There are missing frames in the Zapruder film. The Zapruder film is sent to Kodak in Rochester, New York, where there are alterations made, and there are missing frames from the film that we do have. There's a second film owned by a man named Nix, which the government has never produced. The estate for Mr. Nix has sued to get access to this second film, but whatever's in that film must also contradict the Warren Commission and the official narrative. So it's just my working theory based on all my research that Johnson had his shooter, because Johnson liked to control everything, and that's Malcolm Wallace. I think the Central Intelligence Agency has a shooter. I think the mob imports a Corsican sharpshooter, a Corsican assassin specifically for this job.
Let's talk about the limo driver, someone who is not oft mentioned. There's a theory out there that Kodak altered the Zapruder film to conceal that the limo driver turned back with a gun in hand and delivered the kill shot to Kennedy. Do you know anything about that theory?
I've read about it. The government clearly still has an interest in maintaining this fiction. As you know, Congress set 2017 as the year that all of the documents pertaining to the Kennedy assassination were supposed to be declassified and released, while President Donald Trump released about 80% of them. He was at the last minute persuaded by Mike Pompeo of the CIA to withhold 20%. I asked him directly what was there, and he said, I can't tell you, but it's so horrible you can't imagine it. And if you saw it, you would have made the same decision I did. I said, well, I'm not sure about that. He said, Raj, it's terrible. Someday you'll know. Fast forward to the Biden administration, because if the president didn't release them in 2017, a new date was set under the law. Now Joe Biden releases a small fraction of the documents, but the government continues to hold back a few documents. But I think really at the end of the day, what's shocking both Trump and most likely Biden is the fact that the government themselves, our government, was deeply involved in the murder of JFK. Kilduff says in his oral history that immediately after that, he was on the elevator with the new president, Lyndon Johnson, and he's distraught. He says, Mr. President, who would do this? Who would do such a horrible thing? Who would kill our president? And Johnson says to him, it was a communist, son.
Wow.
And Kilduff says, a communist? What kind of communist? Johnson said it was a Russian communist, son. Well, all of this is before Lee Harvey Oswald has been apprehended. So how is it that Lyndon Johnson knows that a Russian communist has killed John Kennedy? You also made reference to other murders or deaths that had the purpose of concealing what really happened. Guy de Mohrenschildt is a principal figure here. De Mohrenschildt is a white Russian, lives in Dallas. He's quite wealthy. He's a good personal friends with George H.W. Bush. He, I believe, is Oswald's handler. I think he is Oswald's handler for the CIA. The economic gulf between de Mohrenschildt and his socialite wife and the Oswalds is very vast, but de Mohrenschildt befriends Oswald. De Mohrenschildt is involved in helping Oswald get placed in a job in the Texas School Book Depository building, introduces him to a woman named Ruth Payne, who's a very, very interesting and suspicious character in this drama. De Mohrenschildt would later write a very strange letter to George H.W. Bush when he was the CIA director and say, I've got real problems here. I'm really worried about my personal safety. It has to do with some of the things that happened in Dallas. I really need your help. He gets a form letter back from Bush saying, gee, George, I have no idea what you're talking about. Have a nice life. Now, de Mohrenschildt, who's living in Palm Beach at that time, Palm Beach, Florida, gets a subpoena from the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And that very same day, he allegedly blows his brains out with a shotgun. Again, very difficult to do.
And he was writing a book on the JFK assassination titled I'm a Patsy, which supported that, yes, there was a conspiracy, and he considered himself responsible for Oswald's actions.
In terms of my book being a personal portrait of Johnson, Johnson was a psychopath. I mean, he was a pill popper, he was an alcoholic, he was a womanizer, he was a sadist, he was a notorious liar, he was a glutton, he was extraordinarily greedy, he was a functioning lunatic. His staff was deathly afraid of him. Many on his staff, in their own memoirs or oral histories, questioned his sanity. This is a man who, as you know, conducted White House staff meetings while sitting on the toilet defecating, which he did not just to be crude, but which he did in order to humiliate all of those Ivy League White House aides that he had inherited from JFK. St. John Hunt, who's E. Howard Hunt's son, was co-author of my book on the Bush crime family, was and is a good friend, told me that on his deathbed, E. Howard Hunt, legendary CIA operative, later arrested as one of the Watergate burglars, testified that, well, unbeknownst to him or to St. John or Dorothy Hunt, his mother, that E. Howard Hunt was in Dallas, as were 4 other of the Watergate burglars, on November 22nd, 1963. And he said Johnson was running the show, his words.
Nixon basically said that LBJ killed John F. Kennedy.
He says, well, I bet you that President Johnson is going to be real pleased when he finds that now they're calling me the #1 bomber. And George Christian said, oh, don't be too sure. He says, you know, LBJ, he never likes to be #2.
Look, I spent a lot of time with Richard Nixon, not when I was younger. I worked on his 1972 campaign. I worked as just getting out of high school, but I didn't really get to know Richard Nixon on a personal basis until 1977, 79, when I was young Republican national chairman, but then on a more intense basis in 1980. So it was there that I forged a personal relationship with Nixon. I learned that Nixon mixed a mean martini, and that the only time you could ever get him to be expansive, to be loquacious, was after he had a couple drinks. If you talked to him before that, he was very buttoned down. He was not very retrospective. He didn't want to talk about Kennedy or Eisenhower. It was on one of those occasions where I asked him, sir, who really killed Kennedy? And he kind of stared into his martini for a little while, and he said, Dallas. And I said, sir, I'm not sure I understand. He said, let me put it to you this way. Lyndon and I both wanted to be president. The difference was I wouldn't kill for it. So there it is. Nick Ruey, who was Nixon's longtime body man, traveling aide, he was with Nixon when Nixon was watching TV on his Park Avenue apartment in New York City, when he saw Jack Ruby blow away Lee Harvey Oswald. Nixon jumped out of his chair and said, I know that man. That's Rubenstein. Murray Schotner brought him to me. He works for Lyndon Johnson. And indeed, I was able to find records in the House of Representatives archive that at the request of Congressman Lyndon Johnson, Congressman Richard Nixon, who had some leftover money in a staff budget, had hired Jack Rubenstein, later known as Jack Ruby, as an informant for the House Un-American Activities Committee. There is the link between Johnson and Ruby.
We're talking about a president that was talking about breaking up the CIA, not going to Vietnam, challenging the Federal Reserve, challenging the secret cabal. Now we have somebody like President Donald Trump.
Historically, I draw a direct line. So I think those who took out John F. Kennedy in a bloody coup through murder, he was challenging the power of the Central Intelligence Agency. Let's go all the way back to Eisenhower. On his way out, Eisenhower warns us about growing power of an unelected elite that he calls the military-industrial complex. Today we call them the deep state. It's the same thing. Kennedy is murdered for multiple reasons. He will not let Israel have nuclear weapons. He wants to repeal the oil depletion allowance. He insists on a silver-backed dollar. He deeply distrusts the Central Intelligence Agency. He does not want war with the Russians. He's opened secret back channel discussions with Castro. There are many reasons why they want him gone. I think Nixon is taken out in a silent coup as well. There are now multiple declassified documents released just in the last year that prove the Central Intelligence Agency is well aware of the Watergate break-in, that they purposely infiltrate the Watergate break-in team with 4 men who are actively on the payroll of the CIA. The break-in to Watergate is purposely botched. The men are purposely arrested. This is an effort that ends up successfully taking down Richard Nixon. Fast forward to the attempted assassination of Reagan, working on a book on this now. John Hinckley Jr. is always in front of Reagan. He is shooting from a crouching position. Therefore, if he hit Reagan, Reagan would have been hit from an upward trajectory. Reagan is hit from behind and above. Not possible for Hinckley to have shot Reagan. All 4 bullets that were discharged by Hinckley are accounted for. None of them hit Reagan. There's a lot more to that story. Now you have the same, I think, institutional power centers want to remove Donald Trump. Why? Because Trump is not for war. Trump is for peace. He doesn't want any more endless foreign wars where we're spending American treasure and American lives. That's why they invent the Russian collusion hoax. That's why they invent the 2 impeachments. That's why they spied on him using what they know is fabricated evidence in the so-called Steele dossier. This is the deep state. This is the unelected power elite. They're throughout our government. They're in the military. They're in the defense contractors. They're in the think tanks. They're in the colleges. They're certainly in the intelligence agencies. They're in the national security apparatus. Their interest is war. War is extremely profitable for some people. It may not be the same individual people, because obviously those involved in the Kennedy assassination are dead at this point. And many of those who were involved even peripherally with Watergate are no longer with us. But it is the same power center, I should say.